All right. Well, this is a neat conversation that we're going to have. We're going to have a conversation with one of our alumni, Dr. Jason Avedesian. Hey, Jason, how's it going?
John, how's it going? Thanks for having me on today. Super excited
Yeah.
to talk about this.
No, this is awesome. We connected via email a few weeks ago, and you're working in sports science, and we're really trying to build our sports science here at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. And I thought this would be great to sort of get boots on the ground of what sports science is about. And this video would be shared with our undergrad and grad students. And because a lot of our students are continuing to try to explore different career paths, and it's really neat to see where you've gone with your career. And I think this will be fun for students and motivating for students to know why they're in certain classes, why they
Sure,
need
yeah.
to get certain information from classes that maybe they weren't really sure about. So
Definitely.
before I get going too far, though, I would love to have you give sort of a big picture of your academic career, where you are now, and
Yeah.
how you got here.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely as an undergrad, I was taking some classes at that point where I thought, may not have been as worth my time, but now looking back on it, I'm kind of glad I went through the coursework, but then also the discipline it takes to get through some of the courses. So I kind of have a little bit of a unique background, but I think everyone, when they get into roles like this, kind of come into the positions a little bit uniquely. So I went to undergrad at Michigan State, up in East Lansing, Michigan. Started my first 2 years as just strictly mechanical engineering. Father side of the family was a bunch of mechanical engineers, worked automotive industry, things like that. But I always had an interest in sport. Was a hockey player growing up. Played a little bit of lacrosse too, growing up. And there was actually a show that was shot at Wayne State University called Sports Science with John Brinkus. They nowadays show like specials on ESPN, but they used to have like these dedicated shows, half-hour segments each week about just like they were looking at Calvin Johnson's catching radius and different things. I'm like, wow, this is actually really, really neat. So after my second year at Michigan State, I was kind of debating about, do I continue in mechanical engineering? Do I, go strictly kinesiology? But having conversations with some of my family members, they thought, well, why don't we just add your kinesiology degree on there? So I ended up doing both, double majored at Michigan State. Took me a bit to finish undergrad, but the experience was definitely worth it. Was able to get the mechanical side of things from the engineering perspective, but then also too how that then related to the human body, which is where the kinesiology background was really helpful. And then kind of combining those two fields, went into a master's program in biomechanics at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. Did some research there with their volleyball athletes, was looking at just like lower extremity biomechanics as a function of different like warm-up protocols, and had a lot of fun. That was like my first real experience in more of like a formal research setting, being in a biomechanics lab, using force plates, motion capture, EMG, different technologies like that. Really loved it, loved the research experience. But actually in between my first and second year of my master's, I took an internship position with the Tampa Bay Rays baseball organization as a sports scientist. Was helping out in their spring training facility where you'd have like injury rehab guys, you would have athletes in extended league spring training or low A. I was working with a lot of their athletes, doing like pilot testing on some various technologies they were exploring, helping out with like the MLB draft combine. So that was my real first like applied experience within this space, and absolutely loved it. And towards the end of my internship, actually was having a conversation with a fellow by the name of Joe Myers, who is still with the Rays as their director of performance science. Sat down with him and said, this is something that I really enjoy doing, and ultimately have aspirations to be in a role similar to you as like a director of performance science or sports science. And the advice that he gave me was, if you want to do that, I'd recommend continuing on to grad school and going into and getting your PhD. And I was like, okay, this kind of, helped me kind of make my decision for me. With at that point was having preliminary conversations with Dr. Janet Dufik, who ended up being my advisor at UNLV. And then so finished my master's and then moved out to Las Vegas and completed my PhD in interdisciplinary health sciences under Dr. Janet Dufik. Research for my dissertation was looking at the relationship between lower extremity injury and sport concussion in adolescent and collegiate athletes. There's a lot of research suggesting that there's this relationship from like an injury surveillance perspective, but not a lot was known at that point. Still really isn't known so much in terms of like the actual mechanisms driving those two injury types. Had a lot of fun doing that. Really enjoyed my time at UNLV. Was a little bit COVID was in between, was during my PhD, so we had to be flexible with that, but was able to finish the PhD. Still got a really great experience out of it. Met a lot of great folks out there from both the faculty perspective and from a student perspective, folks who I still consider friends to this day. And then after I finished my PhD, I actually took a postdoctoral research role at Emory through their School of Medicine in their new Sports Performance and Research Center in Flowery Branch, Georgia. So it was on the grounds of the Atlanta Falcons practice facility. So spent some time there. Was doing more research related to like sensory motor aspects of lower extremity / ACL injury. Was there for about 6 or 7 months, and then the position at Clemson came up the summer of 2021 for their first ever director of sports science position through Olympic Sports, and so applied for that position. It was a pretty rigorous process for sure. There's a lot of things I had to go through from an interview standpoint, from actual like a case study being provided, some actual data from their men's soccer team that summer. Met with a lot of different folks throughout that, but then was fortunate enough to get that position. So I've been in this role now since November of 2021. So coming up on 2 full years at Clemson now.
I love it. And that is such a great overview. And I think it's important, and you've highlighted this, is you're in essence in school for 10, 11 years.
Yeah, about 11 years. Yeah, 11 years total of
Yeah.
school. Yeah.
And that's a great academic training along the way. And I think, having the long-term vision of where you wanted to go is what gets you through all that training. Because I know on one hand it's fun because you're studying what you want
Right.
to know about, but on the other hand, there's some bumps in the road and you have to get
Sure.
through them. Maybe talk about some of those items that ultimately landed on your resume that helped your resume stand out from others
Sure.
in trying to get that job that you said was very competitive.
Yeah, definitely. I would say some of the things that are really helpful, especially in like these sports science roles now, whether it's entry level all the way up to like director level positions. One of the things that the majority of folks are looking for now is some form of graduate education, whether that's a master's degree, a PhD degree, for a variety of reasons. Just because as you kind of build your academic resume, like you take on more roles and responsibilities, whether it's from a research standpoint or from a mentorship standpoint, or from like having a better understanding of data and statistical analyses. And those are the things that when you get into these roles in industry, that you're going to be taking a lot of the components that you learned in school and then trying to apply it within the actual like applied setting. So that's one of the things that I've noticed as a general trend is like, generally speaking, there's some form of graduate education that is required just because of the experiences and the skills that encompass, going through a master's program, going through a PhD, or completing a thesis, completing a dissertation. And then some of the other things that I think can definitely help folks out, and that goes along with, getting into graduate school and things like that, is having formal research experience. Whether you can get that experience too as an undergraduate student and help out on different projects, help with different graduate students. And that's honestly, when we're bringing on folks from our internship program, if students have prior experience in research labs, like generally that gets folks up to the top in terms of like priority for like interviews, things like that. Just because you're learning skills and tools and working with data that then is very applicable to what we do on a day-to-day basis. So if a student has experience in a biomechanics lab or an exercise physiology lab, they've spent time working on a project, or if they're in grad school and have actually published some research, like generally speaking in roles like this, that is usually pretty favorable, because that's what some of these organizations or some of these other folks are looking for now, is like you've demonstrated the capacity to go through the scientific method from like observing a problem all the way to then formally like disseminating that information. And that's in essence what we do in the applied setting. but it just, that information is a little bit more rapid than some of the more like formal research that we do in a biomechanics lab or things like that. But generally speaking, those are some things that really help an applicant like kind of get their resume to the top there, like that formal research experience, having some form of graduate education. And then I would even say too, the other thing, and this doesn't even require graduate education, is like, have you demonstrated some independent sports science project where you've taken data from a publicly available source? And there's so much publicly available data now in all these different sports, things like that. And have you demonstrated that you can analyze data, you can visualize, you can filter or clean data, and then provide some sort of conclusion based on your analysis and visualization. And like I said, that doesn't require graduate education. That just requires the intuition and the intuition and just like the passion for wanting to like better understand a problem, and then how you actually like disseminate that information. And that's something that can be extremely favorable, whether you're applying for an internship position with an organization all the way up to, you know, an entry level, director level type of position. So those are some things that I've noticed in the field that can generally help folks get up to the top of the application process.
Oh, I love that, and great advice. And I love the research mindset, because one, it helps with that critical thinking skills,
Yeah, for
but it's
sure.
also that independently driven person that can
Yes.
be part of a research project. And the other part of research, getting involved with that, is you start to see how you can apply the knowledge you're learning in a class to answering some question. And
Right.
that's
Right.
always good to make that connection. So that's really great advice. Let's talk about the position you're in now. You're the
Sure.
director of sports science, Olympic sports
Yep.
for Clemson University. That is fantastic. I mean, how cool is that, that you're working with a major university, a major team on that?
It's fun for sure.
I,
I enjoy the work that we do on a daily basis. It
oh,
is
that's
very
great.
fun.
Well, let's talk about that. So, as director, what
Sure.
are your responsibilities?
Yeah, yeah,
What
for sure.
what type of staff do you have, and so forth?
Sure. Yeah, yeah. No, that's a great question. And what was exciting about this position, being that it was the first position of its kind within Clemson, is really had the opportunity to kind of mold it in the vision that I thought like a sports science group should function within a university setting. Always like, as I started to learn more about sports science through undergrad, master's, PhD, like I always thought if I had the opportunity to start like building a sports science program, like what that actually would look like. And then in collaboration with our assistant AD for Olympic sports performance, Rick Franzblaw, like we were able to essentially build our sports science group and get it to the point where it is now, which we're extremely excited about. So just personally, some of my like main roles and responsibilities is one, is overseeing our sports science internship program. So going into the fall, we'll actually have our largest cohort of students. So it'll be 17 or 18 students. The majority of those students are coming from Clemson University, but then each semester, fall, spring, and summer, we open up anywhere from like 3 to 5 positions for external applicants to come from different universities. We've had folks from all different parts of the country. We've had folks actually come from Australia to intern with us. But the majority of our group is made up of Clemson students. So it's overseeing our student internship group, and then actually taking them through a 16 week sports science curriculum, where each week we sit down as a group and talk about various topics within sports science that I think are relevant for practitioners. So one week will be spent on GPS, another week may be spent on like biomechanics. Another week will be spent on like how do we like read, digest research. Another week we spend on like soft skills, because I would make the argument that in these current roles, your soft skills are actually going to be a bit more important than your hard skills. That's a topic for another conversation. But going through that internship curriculum with our students as they start in the internship program. So within those 17 students, I have a couple graduate student assistants. So I have 1 PhD student, 2 master students, and then I also have a few seniors going into their senior year yet now, and then we have a couple students who are on like that sophomore, junior level there. So I have a fairly large internship group, which is definitely needed in our space, because alongside of that responsibility, also have responsibilities for overseeing all the different technologies and then the implementation of those technologies across Clemson Olympic sports. So we currently have, I might be missing this, but we have 16 Olympic sport teams. Including like the track and field, and then the subgroups like short sprints, distance, things like that. So 16 Olympic sport teams. And then within each of those teams, or as this may be like a team or a group specific thing or across the board thing, is like overseeing the different technology that we implement within those different teams. So like, for instance, our soccer teams, lacrosse programs, a few other sports will use Catapult GPS technology. Our other sports may use more heavily like our 1080 resisted sprint devices, or some other sports or multiple sports may be wearing heart rate monitors throughout every training session, throughout every match, every game, things like that. So it's overseeing that technology implementation, making sure the technology is functioning. We're getting the data. Collected. We're getting it analyzed appropriately. And a lot of that is in conjunction with our various performance coaches. So our performance coaches generally will oversee two, in some circumstances, three different teams. So we have one of our performance coaches works with women's soccer and lacrosse. So it's working very closely with her from like the technology standpoint, the assessments, different things like that. So there's the internship, there's the technology side, and then there's also the other part is like our data analytics side of things. So some of our sports collect massive amounts of data. A good example would be our baseball program, where we have a TrackMan Doppler radar system that's installed within our baseball stadium, and collects every single pitch that's thrown live in game and all the physical parameters surrounding that pitch. So like the velocity, the vertical break of a pitch, the horizontal break, the approach that the ball takes getting across home plate. So we take all of that data, and then we also, through a data sharing agreement with the TrackMan company, we get data from every other team across the country and are able to create proprietary pitch models, hitting models to look at how our staff is, look at how other staffs are across the country from like a scouting, player development perspective. So with teams where we do have access to larger data sets like that, we'll also go into more higher level analytics. So yeah, those are probably my main roles, responsibilities. And then I'd say probably the fourth area is then providing services to our various support staff. So our performance coaches, sports medicine, nutrition, obviously the sport coaches themselves, with any other sort of information that they need to help better inform like their decision-making process. Because at the end of the day, like myself and our team, we don't actually make the decisions in terms of like who's starting and stopping, like when an athlete is cleared to return to play. We're just providing the data and information to better inform that formal decision-making process, whether it's the sport coach or sport medicine, performance coach, things like that. So we don't replace the decision-making, we help provide the data and information to inform the decision-making. And that's something that where you see sometimes some like high-profile clashes within like professional sport, where there's a clash between the analytics group and then the sport coaches, because the analytics group thinks that they should ultimately be the ones making the decision, where the sport coaches was hired for the purposes of making those decisions. So you do see that sometimes play out in real time, but from our perspective and how our sports science group functions, we don't actually make the decisions. We just provide the information to the decision makers. So that's something that I think every student needs to kind of be aware of when they get into this field, is you weren't hired to decide who starts and who doesn't in a game, or you weren't hired to, make the decision of, oh yeah, this athlete's cleared after 8 months or whatever. You were hired to help support that decision-making process. I think that's something that students definitely need to be cognizant of in these types of roles. But yeah, those are probably the big main roles, responsibilities of what I do on a day-to-day basis. Where we see sports science as a whole is there's kind of two branches of it. There's the performance science aspect, so like more of your daily athlete monitoring, external load monitoring, internal training response. But But then the other branch of it is like our data analytics side, where we go in and develop predictive models, different things like that, based of like large data sets and machine learning techniques. So we have students, and then within those that help more on the performance science side, or may help more on the analytics side. So that's why there's definitely a need for our group to be have a fairly decent size cohort to help me out on.
That is amazing and impressive that you're overseeing this, and it is, amazing to see how this area has grown really
Yeah,
tremendously over
definitely.
the last, I'd even say 5 years.
Yeah,
It is relatively young in terms of forming these types of teams that you're overseeing.
sure.
The teams in terms of the analysis, not the athletes, all the students that you have working. So these students are doing everything from collecting data to
Yep,
processing data to reporting
yep,
data back to you and or to the
yep,
coaches.
yep. Yeah, exactly. Yep.
So maybe, and I love that you brought up the soft skills part because that is such an important area
Yeah,
in
for
something like
sure.
this. But maybe talk a little bit about where the coaches do fit into the work that you do. Like, would you meet with the coaches? Do the coaches meet with the
Yep.
student teams, and do they have questions that they want to have answers to, or how does that dialogue happen between you and the coaches?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's part of our other kind of pillar too, is like the majority of the questions that our sports science team is answering is practitioner driven. So it's a question that may have been developed by one of our performance coaches, or it's a question that may have been developed by one of our sport coaches, or by sports medicine, or things like that. It's more often than not, the work and the question that we're answering isn't driven through the sports science group. And that's something that also I think is important for students to understand, is like some of the things that we may find interesting may not actually be useful in the context, in the environment, and the situation that we're in. Our job is to answer the question that is most relevant to our support staff or our student athletes, or different things like that. Because I may have research interests that may not be particularly relevant in the current setting, or the current time of the year that we're in. And that's, I think that's something that's important, is like you want to answer the questions that are useful, not just the questions that are interesting to you as a sports scientist. So we're driven off of that model, where the majority of our questions are coming from our various practitioners, whether that's sport coaches themselves, or it's sports medicine, or it's our performance coaches. They may observe something on the field, or they may observe something within the clinic, or they may observe something within the weight room. And then we, take that more formal scientific process or scientific method, and then go about trying to answer that question in the best way possible. What usually happens in a scenario like that is like we have an overarching, a big picture question. And as we start working through the big picture question, we tend to start answering a lot of sub questions as well. And it's one of those processes that never truly ends. But at the end of the day, you're providing the service based on like what are the current needs of our staff, or of our student athletes. So and honestly, and this is where the soft skills come really into play here. A lot of these questions, or a lot of these things that you start to see with whether a sport coach values, or a performance coach, like what they value, comes from like informal conversations. Like you're at practice with them, or you're in a performance staff meeting, or just walk by them in the hallway, honestly, and start having a conversation with them. And you start to learn more about like what our soccer coach values, or what our softball coach values, or what our performance coach with women's lacrosse, like what do they value? And then that's kind of where some of this information actually like starts to get translated. It's like, oh, I want to look more, look more into like trying to take some of the luckness out of like soccer, because there's some luck involved, in terms of like if we remove some of the luck, and we can better understand like where our more damaging opportunities come with our soccer program, like how can we go about looking at that? Or if we get into a situation where our formation may change as a function of if we're leading or if we're not leading within a soccer match, how can we better show that to our coaching staff, or things like, and then that kind of kickstarts a whole process down the line there. And you start answering some ancillary questions off of like a larger question, or like we want a better understanding on our pitching staffs, like who has the best fastball, or who has the best curveball. Okay, well, this is how we go develop a model to say this fastball is better than this fastball. but then also too, it comes off of like, how do certain pitches both play off of each other, and it just goes down and down. You just get further and further into the weeds, and that's ideally like what a sports science group can do, because at the end of the day, like sport coaches, sports medicine, nutrition, performance coaches, they only have so much bandwidth that they can do in terms of like data and analytics and things like that. But if you do have a sports science group, they can get much more deeper for the actual question. So like our goal is to get very deep, but also to get very wide too, with the amount of questions that we can help our staffs with.
I love that, and I'm glad you brought that up because it is amazing how much data, and you mentioned this, how much data can be collected so
Yeah,
easily now with all the
right,
wearable technology that's
right.
been developed and continuing to be developed. And trying to manage all that data is that's an impressive job that you're doing there. But I
Yeah,
love
it's
that.
definitely a job in and of itself, is being able to manage
Yeah.
the amount of data. And we're fortunate at Clemson to have access to a lot of data. We just have to be very cognizant of, okay, these are the different teams that are collecting these types of data.
Mhm.
How then do we go about the actual collection, analysis, and then actually getting that data into the folks who need to get that data? And I think it's something important for students or people who are starting to get into this field, is also being very mindful of like how you like vet the different technologies that are out there nowadays. Because especially with wearable technology, Dr. Mercer, as you know, a lot better than most people, like there's been this explosion of wearable technology within the field of sports science or related fields. And companies can claim that they can measure, X, Y, and Z and improve performance by X percent. But in my experience, sometimes those claims are not necessarily backed up by the most rigorous, like scientific evidence, for a variety of reasons from a company standpoint. So it's really being mindful of like, if you're looking to acquire technology, like you have to do your homework. And there's different things that you can do as a sports scientist to do that. Talk to other practitioners who may have used the technology, ask the company to allow you to demo the product for a month, ask if you're able to get the access to raw data, and you can look at it in comparison to like their proprietary models. In my experience, the better companies, or the companies that are more confident in their product, will allow you the flexibility to do that. Whereas the companies who may not be as confident in some of their claims generally don't allow some of that access that you would like to get as when you're vetting this technology. So like, while we're fortunate to have a lot of technology, it does provide us a lot of help. You just have to be careful of like, one, like mindlessly buying technology for the sake of it, and also two, mindlessly collecting data just for the sake of collecting data. It has to have some utility and purpose at the end of the day. That's my whole kind of tangent on data, just because like in our role, like we deal with so much data that we just have to be cognizant of like, is this data actually going to be useful on a day-to-day basis for our student athletes and for our staffs?
Oh, that's great. I'm so glad you brought that up and that you're aware of that. And that was going to be my follow-up question to this is working with, I take it you also work with athletes and coaches. And
Yep.
how do you, and, not to take a negative approach to it, but how do you avoid data overload
Mhm.
where you get that paralysis by analysis
Yeah, for
as an
sure.
athlete or a coach? So how do you keep that sort of at the forefront of what you're doing?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, that's a great question, and that's something that we do experience, and you experience across different positions within this field of sports science. Is like, you have the ability to collect so much data, but you have to figure out actually what's useful and what's going to actually translate to the coach or translate to the student athlete for them to understand the rationale behind collecting this data. A good example is like our GPS technology can quantify a lot of different aspects from like an external train. Like there's a lot of different metrics that you can get with GPS. You can get obviously like the macro level variables of like total distance run, or how many sprints that an athlete is exposed to, all the way down to like goalkeepers, how many dives do they take to the left, or how many micro accelerations do they complete within a match. So for example, like that, we're not going to provide them, all 70, 80 different metrics that our GPS knowledge, our technologies can provide. Because then you get that whole issue of like, why am I looking at a report with 70, 80 different variables?
Mhm.
So for us, and same thing with like force plate technology too, is like there's a lot of metrics that can get outputted within after doing a single counter movement jump. For our intended purposes, and this is where like KPI development becomes really important for us, is like being able to take force plate data and better understand, okay, which of these metrics actually correlates or associate best with like on-field performance. So there's a lot of that as well too. And that's not only in the sport world, it's in the business world, any sort of industries. Like when you have the ability to collect so much data, you have to understand which 3 to 5 different parameters can best explain like performance variance. And that's when we do like a lot of benchmarking with our athletes, like because we have access in some data sets, whether it's GPS or force plate data, like we have a couple of years worth of data, or even up to 5 to 10 years worth of data, so we can better understand through our athletes like who have been all ACC performers or all American performers, or professional draft picks, because we do work with quite a few athletes that each year will get drafted into professional soccer or professional baseball or things like that. What have been the characteristics of those athletes? And then how have we been able to identify like these KPIs that then that's when we're going to focus on from like a counter movement jump standpoint, or from a catapult GPS standpoint. So it's a lot of that too. It's a lot of like thinking initially of like, okay, I have this huge set of GPS data. What's best going to explain a men's soccer athlete, or best going to explain a women's lacrosse athlete in terms of like their performance and the variation of performance? And then those are the metrics that we'll stick with. So like catapult's a good example. Our GPS technologies, like you can collect a lot of different metrics, but we tend to stick with 5 to 10 metrics across the board, whether that's lacrosse, soccer, things like that, where those are the metrics that we stick with. And then it's also too, from that standpoint, it is that educational aspect of like the coaching staffs as well, because they're not an expert in GPS technology, or they're not an expert in force plate technology, but you as a sports scientist have to be able to have those soft skills to then explain like, this is why we're looking at accelerations and decelerations above 3 and below 3 meters per second squared, because these are a high intense A cells and D cells. And so they're important from just a mechanical loading standpoint, as well as like from an injury risk, injury profiling standpoint. So it's having those like, it's having the knowledge of the technology and the data itself, but then also being able to convey it in an informal manner that a sport coach or a student athlete or another practitioner can then understand, oh yeah, this is why we look at our A3, D3 metric in soccer. That's what we call it, our high intense A cells and D cells. So that when a coaching staff is looking at, our match day -2 report, and there's a huge amount of high intense A cells and D cells, like that conveys to them, oh, I may have pushed our athletes too hard today. Match day -1 needs to be a bit lighter than what we initially anticipated. So it's things like that. It's like, it does take some time with like this different data to then actually educate your student athletes, educate your coaches about like what the data is, and then also too like why it ends up being important at the end of the day. So and that's going back to the soft skills. That's where a lot of this comes into play, because you can have a high level of expertise in a certain technology or a certain line of thinking, but if you can't communicate that in a manner that's digestible to your audience, like you're gonna have a tough time in those meetings being able to explain like, oh, this is why we're looking at our GPS technology. Different things like that.
That is great. And so, yeah, I imagine you're really exploring data visualization
Yeah.
techniques. What's the best way to, convey information to
Yep.
someone, and then even identifying actionable items for people. And that's I imagine that's a lot of what you're focused on is, yeah, you
Yep.
have this information, but what's actionable, and
Yeah.
how do you identify those?
Exactly, because and that too is a lot of that is, in my experience, I've seen is like it's personal preference. Like some of our performance coaches like to see data in a certain way, or some of our sport coaches like to see data in a certain way. And that's you as a sports scientist serving the needs and the ask of your audience. So if a certain coach likes to see data in a certain way, like that's how we're gonna do it, because that's how they're going to be able to digest and then understand that data. What's really important for folks to know about positions like this is that more often than not, you're not going to have an hour to explain your findings. You're most often going to have like 3 to 5 minutes to be able to explain, like you're in a performance staff meeting because you also have, nutrition, you have sports medicine, you may have folks from academics in these meetings, you have the sport coaches. So there's a lot of people within the room, and you have about an hour-long meeting. And so each, folk within each of the groups will speak when they get to the sports science or the performance group. You may have about 3 to 5 minutes to focus on something that's, an issue during this week or is an upcoming thing. So like, you may spend quite a bit of time working on this analysis and everything, and all the ancillary things related to it. But at the end of the day, you're not going to have that much time to explain your findings. That's why with my students and other folks who have opportunities to do it, while I'm a big champion of like the 3-minute thesis competitions that UNLV hosts and other institutions host across the world, just because like that is the real world. Like you have to have your elevator pitch ready in these types of meetings, or even too, like just walking through the hallway with different folks. If like you're able to stop and have a conversation with someone, like you need to be able to convey that information in a pretty quick and efficient manner, because if you can't, then you may have just wasted months and months of your time. You may have more or less maybe blown your chance to get a message across that may have been important. Just how you presented the information may have been inappropriate. So that's why, like, I always go back to the soft skill stuff about how important this is within the field of sports science, because like our student athletes, our practitioners, they do have some pretty strict time constraints. Like they have to be at practice, so they have to be recruiting, or they're prepping for a match, they're scouting. Like our student athletes have to, obviously they're going to class throughout the day, they're going to tutoring at night, they have other obligations as well. Like we always have to be mindful of like the time constraints that are placed on our student athletes and our practitioners, and you have to be able to fit your information within those time constraints. So that's something that I'm always thinking about, is how this information gets channeled across to the people who need it in the most efficient manner.
That is great. And what a great message, because in order to do that elevator speech at 3 to 5 minute, you've got to work so hard to really understand the
Yeah,
information and then
yeah,
pick out
exactly.
those
Yep,
critical pieces to
yep,
convey in that limited time. So
yep,
that's a really great exercise. In my class, I do 3-minute videos, and that's the message I try to give
yep.
them, is that they have to work harder to do a 3-minute video than they would to do a 10, 20, 30-minute video, because if you have more time, you just keep throwing out more and more information. But
Right.
3 minutes, you got to pick out the most critical pieces of information, how they work together. So
Yep.
I love that. So, man, do you sleep? This is amazing.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, yeah. And that's the thing too, is like as a sports scientist or someone who's within the performance space, is you have to be mindful of yourself as well. And you have
Yeah,
to take care of yourself,
yeah,
because if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not able to provide the best service
yeah,
possible
that's
to
right.
your groups. And that's something, like when you get in that setting like this, like in full transparency, there's always something you can be doing within a higher level collegiate sport or professional sport organization. There's always things that you can be
Mhm.
working on, but you have to be able to step away from that day to day, week to week, month to month, take time for yourself, so that when you come back the next morning, you come back, whenever, like you're always providing a really good service. It's something that I've learned along the way, because I was naturally, as I was going through undergrad and grad school, someone who just wanted to constantly keep working, 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 and working. And I've learned over time that when I take care of myself a little bit more, I can provide a better service. My work productivity throughout the day can be better. I can communicate more efficiently. So it's definitely something that I'm extremely mindful of now, as I've gotten into this role and will hopefully continue into this role. Just because like it is at the end of the day, like the work that we're doing is important and it's very exciting. But at the end of the day, like you have to be able to step away from it on a day-to-day basis to be able to provide, better service down the line. And two, I'm also very fortunate to have a really great support staff, whether it's my graduate students, some of my undergraduate students, our performance coaches, things like that have helped like really build the system and the models that's in place for our group. But yeah, that's my thing too with students, is like, while the work is important, and the work is definitely fun, you have to be able to balance out other important aspects within your life. I don't necessarily call it work-life balance. I just call it like prioritization,
Mhm.
balancing. Like what are your priorities, and that sometimes that changes throughout your career, obviously.
Oh, I love that. And that's great advice to give to people listening to this. So let's dive into that a little bit more.
Sure.
What does a typical day look like for you? How,
Yeah, yeah.
because
That's a
sport can take over and it can be 7 days a week with games
right,
and
right,
competitions, practices and what have you. So
right.
give a sense of what you do on a day-to-day
Sure.
basis.
Yeah, yeah. That is a great question. And when you get into an applied setting like this, whether it's collegiate sport, professional sport, your hours can be in some circumstances like non-traditional. What I mean by that is for our student athletes, especially when they're in the fall and in the spring semester, there's training. The training blocks are typically early in the morning, and then from like mid-afternoon onwards, because throughout like that 9 a.m. to 2, 3 p.m. o'clock time frame, that's when most of our student athletes are in class during the week. So we do have some instances where we may start our day with some testing, monitoring things at like 7 a.m. in the morning with one of our soccer programs or one of our lacrosse programs, like within their lifting session. So it's coordinating a lot of that. So I may walk in at 6 a.m. in the morning on some instances throughout the week, or come in at 6:30 or things like that, and help out with like setting up of the collection that we're doing, coordinating with our student interns in terms of like, because they get a lot of this experience in terms of like the actual collection, which I think is really valuable for them. So it may be things like that, early part of the morning. And then it's kind of get into more of like mid-morning, 9 a.m. Ish time. I may have some meetings with some of our performance staff or some of our sports medicine staff, about certain topics within the sport, or more like big picture initiative items that we're trying to tackle. So things like some meetings that they may have to attend in the mid-morning. And then generally where I designate a lot of my like dedicated like work time to get some of my things done on my end is anywhere from like noon to probably about 3 p.m. is where like I have like dedicated blocks to really focus on some certain things, because one of my main roles and responsibilities on a daily basis is managing our athlete management system. So we use a system called Kitman Labs. It helps take a lot of this different data, whether it's catapult data or it's student athlete wellness data or it's force plate data, and it's aggregating it into these easy to use dashboards, platforms that our performance coaches or sports medicine can look at. So it's a lot of managing that. And so that's one of my main projects. So I dedicate a couple hours, 3 hours, just to dedicated work time. And then what I try to do, and this is, I think, something that's really important for a sports scientist, and it can get kind of crazy with all the different athlete and team schedules, is I try to get out to practices as much as I can throughout the week. So it's attending, men's soccer training in the morning, or it's attending lacrosse practice in the afternoon, or it's going to volleyball practice in the mid morning. I'm not going to obviously stay for the whole practice, but I do want to be able to show face, and I do want to be able to interact with our sport coaches and our other practitioners within those different sports, and just want to kind of check in with our different sports. And I think it's important too, for sports scientists also to better contextualize like the data that they're actually looking at the end of the day. And just being able to better understand the demands of the sports. How, again, it comes back to like what our sport coaches or practitioners value within that sport. So throughout the day, I'll try as best as I can, but can't make it out to every single practice every day, but try to attend as many practices as I can. And then I'm trying to think of what else be. The other thing too is sit down with my students throughout the week too. You generally will schedule meeting blocks, one-on-one meetings, group meetings as well throughout the day and throughout the week, in terms of like just touching base in terms of like what are the current projects that we're working on, what are things that are coming up down the line. So coordinating meetings with my graduate students, my undergraduate students, our external students who are with us for the semester, just so that we're all staying on task, we're all staying focused on the work that we're doing. So there's quite a bit of meetings too. I will say, as you get into like these like director level quote unquote types of roles, you are in quite a bit of meetings. But generally those meetings are for the purpose of like driving big picture initiatives. And then I will say, this isn't necessarily on a day-to-day basis, but this does happen fairly frequently, is I'll sit down and meet with our various academic units across campus. So I actually have adjunct faculty status within our bioengineering department, which I was super excited about. I actually received that about 3 or 4 months ago. But then also too, working with our physics department, our mathematical science department, our data science department, in terms of actually coming up in September, I'll be going to a series of undergraduate physics lectures, and then 200 students in each of those lectures, and just kind of, again, kind of what we're talking about, Dr. Mercer, is like, what is sports science? Like, what does the field look like right now? How can students get opportunities? So that may not be a day-to-day aspect of my role, but I do that pretty frequently throughout the year, is working with our various academic units on some of these other initiatives. Just because like in a university setting, in my role, like I have a unique opportunity to engage with those different units, and that's where our students will come from an internship standpoint. That's how we can develop relationships with faculty members from like a research output opportunities. So I'm very cognizant of that because I do come from a formal research and academic background. So I'm very mindful of establishing good relationships with our various academic units. So a little bit of kind of the day-to-day. I will say, like in a setting like this, in Olympic sports is a little unique compared to practitioners who may be with one sport. The day can get pretty hectic too. Like things change all the time, schedules change, something may happen. So in a role like this, like you do have to be pretty adaptable, just because it is in a sense kind of controlled chaos throughout the day. So you have to be mindful that any and everything can come your way. You just have to kind of be ready for it. So, but it is exciting though. I do kind of enjoy the sort of chaotic aspect of the environment. It keeps you on your toes for sure.
Oh, it certainly sounds like it, and it looks like you have to have a wide breadth of knowledge in different areas to be able to communicate with these different stakeholders or these different people, from
Sure,
faculty in different areas to
sure.
athletes to staff and so forth. So it's really impressive what the work that you're doing. So I'm curious if you had to think back to your education training,
Hmm.
looking back now, knowing where you are, is there a particular type of course that you would like to have taken, whether that be like budgeting or
Sure,
finance or
sure.
management or where maybe those gaps in the training?
Sure. I would say the best advice that I could probably give a student right now, and this is looking back on my academic career, but then also thinking about like the role in the industry itself, is one of my best pieces of advice for students is to start picking up some of these different coding languages, whether it's MATLAB or it's Python or it's R, just because like in these settings and in these environments, like you may have access to a lot of data, and then you have to go about analyzing and visualizing this type of data through some pretty, efficient means. Like Excel is great, and Excel can be a pretty powerful tool. But when you have a pitching data set of 2.5 million pitches, like you're not really going to be able to do a whole lot in an Excel or related software. So definitely, I would advise students to, whether it's through undergrad, graduate school, definitely start to pick up some of these languages. You don't have to necessarily be an expert at it, but having some competency and being able to take a data set, analyze and visualize it can be really, really helpful. The other thing too that I would advise students, and just looking back on myself too, I tried to take as many of these courses I could at UNLV, and I thought they were helpful going forward, is take as many like research methods / statistical analysis courses as you can throughout undergrad or grad school. Just because one, it helps you better think about like the research method line of thinking within the applied setting, but then also two, when you're actually analyzing this type of data, like making sense of like what is actually statistically versus like practically significant. And the stat side of things does take quite a bit of training in terms of like learning what's an appropriate statistical analysis based on the data set you're looking at, what's the actual interpretability of the data itself. So that would be probably my two areas that for folks who like want to know, like, okay, where are some courses or things like that I can take that will help me from this standpoint, is definitely from a coding side of things, take as much coursework as you can in that. And then from a research method / statistical analysis standpoint, take as many courses as you can in that. Learn about those two areas, and then allow your other coursework to provide more of the, I guess, quote unquote, like theoretical underpinnings of like human performance, whether that's biomechanics or physiology or motor learning, different things like that. My big kind of perspective of like a sports scientist is like, for a lot of these industry positions, whether it's college or professional, like they're not going to have a team of 20 sports scientists. They may have 2, they may have 3, or they may even have 5 in some organizations. But my line of thinking is like develop expertise in 1 or 2 areas, whether that's biomechanics and sports medicine, or that's motor learning and data analysis. Like try to develop expertise level competency in 1 or 2 areas, and then being able to have generalist capabilities within these other areas related to human performance, or sports science. And that does take quite a bit of time, and that takes a lot of training, and it takes a lot of patience to be able to, one, develop expertise in a line or a couple lines of sports science, but then also being able to understand other areas. Like I don't have expertise in nutrition, I don't have expertise in motor learning, but I think I have enough of a baseline that I can have a conversation with an expert in that area and understand like when I need more help or when I need more dedicated expertise within a certain area. So that's kind of my other, I guess, piece of advice for students is like, it does take some patience and it does take some forward thinking in terms of like, in 3 to 5 years, what skills do I need to possess and how am I going to get there to possess those skills to be able to occupy a position like this. Take some time, take some patience, takes definitely some hard work, but it can be a very fruitful outcome if you do, stay on track.
I love it. And just that passion for learning and continuing to
Yes,
evolve
definitely.
yourself is so important. So that's great. So let's switch gears a little bit because you've mentioned
Sure.
a little bit of this, and I want to get your thoughts on it. Where is this field of sports science going? I don't think we're too far off from college team, or the majority of college teams and
Sure.
obviously professional teams all having sports scientists now,
Right.
and that wasn't the case 10 years ago,
Right.
but it's certainly growing in that area. Where do you see sports science going?
Yeah, I think Dr. Mercer, you're right on track there. Because even 10 years ago, there weren't a lot of these positions within the American university system. And over the last, I mean, I see positions going up almost monthly now in terms of different universities having dedicated positions. Professional sports, there's definitely quite a few more right now, just because of large organizations have the infrastructure to do it, but you're starting to see even more and more, universities being able to now offer, dedicated support and personnel for sports science. And I think it's going to just continue to grow because our practitioners in our performance and medical space are continuing to collect more and more data, and they need dedicated personnel to make sense of it, how to correctly analyze, interpret that data. So I don't think these positions are going away. I think they're just going to keep growing exponentially because like the field, quote unquote, of sports science is relatively new compared to like some of our other fields like sports medicine, strength and conditioning, different things like that. So it's a relatively newer space, especially in the American university system. And that is honestly kind of an exciting thing because practitioners who are currently occupying these roles have opportunities to then mold the future of the profession in terms of like, what are best practices? What are some things that folks need to achieve in order to then occupy an industry level position? So it's still kind of in its infancy, but it's also exciting to be able to see kind of where that field is going. But I definitely think that there's going to continue to be more and more positions available, both in the professional and the university space, or even seeing some of these quote unquote non-Power 5 schools now have dedicated positions for sports science and ancillary roles like that. So I think, I would predict within the next 5 to 10 years, I would say the majority of university programs will have dedicated sports science support. And I would envision that if it hasn't happened yet, I would say the overwhelming majority of professional organizations, whether that's the NBA, the MLB, the NHL, MLS, like the majority of those groups and those teams will have dedicated positions.
Oh, I
just
love
because of this, the amount of data and the amount of insights that our practitioners are currently collecting. You just need support on that side of things.
No, I love it. And it's a whole team of people that are trying to help the athlete perform better
Right,
and the team
right,
perform better, but also just the mental health of
right.
athletes as well. That
Yeah.
you're part of that, sort of performance team to address that issue with students as well, student
Yes,
athletes.
definitely, definitely,
Well,
definitely.
Jason, I said I'd keep you about an hour. We're almost there, but I still have
Yeah,
a couple more questions for you. So let
sure.
me
Yeah, yeah.
let
We
me
can keep going. Yeah, no problem.
let me go a little bit on the lighter side here, and I love
Sure.
that you brought up the work-life balance and the type of job that you're in can certainly be overwhelming in hours. Again, as we talked about with
Right.
team schedules and traveling and what have you. So, what do you do outside of work? Outside of work, what do you enjoy doing?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So, with around Clemson, it's actually there's a lot of different like hiking and there's a lot of different like areas to visit. Like we're within like a 2 hour radius of Charlotte and Atlanta, and then Charleston out by the coast over there is a few hours away. So I enjoy going getting outdoors. Honestly, is something that I enjoy doing. I'm just a big reader, reading for leisure. I love reading. I do still love reading my academic articles, especially like some ACL concussion stuff. I try to keep up to date as much as I can on that. But I do like reading for leisure. I actually just bought a house recently.
Oh,
We moved in about 6-7 weeks ago, and I'm slowly realizing like how much time a house consumes and all the different things you have to do. But I am actually really enjoying that process in terms of like trying to get my grass to grow and like trying to like things like that. So, uh, but yeah, it's just things like that. Getting out of the environment on a day-to-day basis, doing things that I enjoy for leisure, getting outdoors. But at the end of the day, like the reason I got into a role like this is just because I do love sports. And so I attend a lot of our baseball games and soccer games and lacrosse games and volleyball games. So especially as we get into the fall and the spring, like I do attend a lot of our sporting events to support our student athletes and our coaching staffs and things like that. So sports do consume a good amount of time of my day, but also making sure that I get out of the office, get out of the weight room, get out of the facility, and do some other things. Do like to travel when I do get some time to travel. I actually just came back from a trip out in California with my girlfriend, and I went out West Coast. So I get some time. Do like to go explore, see some new places. Hoping to get an abroad trip in here sometime next year. Um, but um, but yeah, just some things that I do. I'm a relatively I don't want to say basic person, but I enjoy like some pretty simple things. If I have a good book, I can be pretty happy. I can be pretty happy in life outside of the hecticness that is
Yeah.
my current role.
Well, and it's good that you're aware of that you want to
Yeah,
have that
definitely,
balance,
definitely.
and I think that is healthy because it does make you, like you said, a better, employee or better, better at your job, and
Yes,
so that's
definitely.
wonderful. All right, but I do have to ask you though, when you watch sports, are you able to watch sports and enjoy it, or are you watching it for, hey, we should be measuring that, or I wonder if this is what's going on?
I would say it's a little bit of both. There are certain circumstances like we're in like a big match with women's soccer, or we're in a big game in softball, or a big game in baseball. Like it does get kind of nerve-wracking for me a little bit, just personally, because I want our student athletes to succeed, because I know the effort and the dedication that they put in, not just in season too, but out of season, preseason, training camps, things like that. So want our student athletes, want our sport coaches, want our performance staff to do well. So there is a little bit of that where it's like, you really just want them to do so well. But yeah, there is some things, and honestly, like some of these questions that we're answering and things like that do come from like the observations within the game too. Like we'll
Mhm.
debrief after a weekend series, or we'll debrief after a match and things like that. And we may notice some things within a particular match or within a game, that may, have us go down a different question, or an ancillary question off of a bigger question. So there's some of that. And then I would say the other thing too that the sports science our group does is we do a bit of scouting across like other ACC teams, other teams across the country in some of these different sports. So it's watching from also an enjoyment standpoint, but also too from like a scouting standpoint. Did our scouting report match up with what's actually being done in real time? And if it did, it becomes a little more enjoyable to watch a game or watch a match. But we're fortunate, especially on the Olympic sports side here at Clemson, that across the board within athletics, like we have some pretty high level teams. Our men's soccer team won the national championship 2 years ago. Our baseball team won the ACC championship this past spring. Our softball program made it to super regionals. So while it's very exciting for our teams to advance in postseason and things like that, it does get nerve wracking because you want them just to achieve and to be successful.
Yeah.
So yeah, there is that aspect. It's exciting, but it's very nerve wracking for me at the same time. But I love it though. I enjoy it. I do enjoy it.
Well, and going back to what you were talking about before in terms of the importance of a research approach and including that in your education, a big part of research is observation.
Yeah,
So you
absolutely.
really need to
Absolutely.
watch and take that in because I like how you said it, where you sort of put things into context. So that's great.
Yeah, extremely important, extremely important. It's
Yeah,
very easy to just look at data and analyze it, but if
yeah,
you don't have the appropriate context or what the intent of the training session was or things like that, you can make a incorrect interpretation that may not be received well by the folks that you're trying to give the information to if you don't have the context
yeah.
behind it. So that's super, super important, is to be an observer, to really study the sport of interest.
All right. Final question.
Yep.
You're in the Southeast now. Who were you
Yep.
rooting for in the Stanley Cup?
Oh, I was definitely rooting for the Knights. No, that's
Oh,
for
I
sure.
love it.
Because
I love it.
when I first came to Las Vegas in the summer of 2018, that was when they were making the run to their first cup.
I
Unfortunately,
know.
lost to the
Yeah.
Capitals.
Oh,
So really kind of latched onto them. Went to quite a few games when I was out in Las Vegas. So I was certainly pulling for the Knights. So it was really neat to
awesome.
see,
Yeah.
really neat to see them win their first Stanley Cup.
That was exciting. We in Vegas, we had to wait 6 long years for it to happen. So
Yeah, not too long compared to like the Toronto Maple Leafs for some of these other Canadian teams that
I
have been waiting
know.
quite a while.
Yes, they are. They are. So we're fortunate. So Jason, this has been great. I have really enjoyed talking with you, hearing more about what you're doing, and I really appreciate the time that
Yeah,
you've given
absolutely.
here. And the students who are listening and others listening, this is really valuable.
No, I appreciate it, Dr. Mercer. I appreciate taking the time. Being an alum of UNLV, I thought it would be kind of just a neat thing, just to like, someone who's been through a program at UNLV, like what are potentially some opportunities you can take, whether it's out of undergrad, grad school. So I always love kind of sharing some of my experiences. Hopefully, this may help a student at UNLV, as they're kind of thinking about their career trajectory or where they're trying to pursue some different things.
That's awesome. Well, thank you. Very generous. Okay. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
All right.